for the Thursday, August 22nd, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board meeting. First off, we'll do roll call. All managers are present except for Manager Hejmati and Manager White. Next, we have matters from the floor. Anybody here wish to say anything that is not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. Approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
Approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Manager Miller, second by Maxwell. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Information correspondence items. There are none tonight. Next, we have the consent agenda. Consent agenda includes approval of the minutes of the August 8th board meeting, approval of check registers, which is general checking accounts, surety at checking account and wire transfers. Next is consent items, which are Resolution 24.045, adoption of the minor plan amendment to the watershed management plan, and item 7.2, which is Resolution 24.046, selection and authorization to execute a contract for legal services. Do I have a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Motion by Miller for
Second.
second, Sando. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On our regular agenda, we have an update tonight from Policy and Planning Committee meeting from Manager Miller.
We had two excellent reports on progress of the planning of the County Road 6 pond retrofit and East Osborne wetland restoration, and they kind of set the standard for reports on projects in progress. So we're looking forward to that being a regular program on our capital improvements and other in other long-term projects.
Thank you. Next is upcoming meetings and event schedules. They're posted in the agenda. With a special note for September 8th, we have a Citizen Advisory Committee meeting, and Manager Hejmati will be the liaison. Next, we have permits requiring a variance or discussion. There are none of those. Item 10, this is a public hearing and presentation for the 2025 budget and levy. And I will open the public hearing and invite James Whisker to the podium.
Thank you, Chair Olson, managers. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm really excited to be before you this evening to provide an overview of the 2025 budget and proposed levy to support tonight's public hearing. I'm going to start by not burying the lead. The Watershed District's 2025 budget proposes a 0.5% decrease in budgeted expenditures over 2024 and no increase to the tax levy. I think that's in large part due to careful planning by our Board of Managers. And over the last half a decade, the district taxpayers, as a result of that planning, have only seen a 2% increase in one of the last 6 years, all while continuing to deliver impactful projects on the landscape in partnership with our member communities.
We shouldn't let that statement just go. It's really terrific work on behalf of the staff to keep the budget and the levy is reasonable as it is. You know, we're using all the other resources that we can, capital financing and grants and partnerships and everything. But it's you know, you see 7 and 8% increases in all units of local government, and you know they got different missions obviously, but you know it would be easy to fall in line and just say that you know we're no different than anybody else, but we are because we're better. I think we're more focused and we've got less plans and we do a better job of planning for it. And I really want to commend James for the work he's done on that.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
I think a big part of the success is James and all the staff, looking at challenges as opportunities and figuring out, how do we solve for this and make things better every time something comes up? Like, how do we figure out what the issues are? How do we make things even better? Which consultants do we use? Which staff do we improve, bring in, wait to recruit? He uses all the tools to figure out how do we get the results. And I think that makes a big difference. And it shows in not only how you accomplish your priorities, but you're doing it in a really respectful way and fiscally responsible way. So I agree. The credit goes to the whole staff team.
I tried to give the credit to the board, but we'll take it back. I think it's a solid team effort like most of the work that we do, and we are different. We are a special purpose unit of government. We have this focus. We talked a lot in committee about how everything that we do has to be through partnership. So there's very few pockets of what we do that's operational and run rate. I think one of the things that the board's really embraced is this zero-based budgeting approach, where each year it's which initiatives are we trying to advance. They're usually multi-year initiatives that are in queue, but then all of our work is in support of that. So that keeps things fresh. We're not just carrying things over year to year. So we talked about this briefly before the meeting, just in jest, small housekeeping note. I'm going to be leading tonight's presentation and then leaving. I've got to get out of here by 7:30, so if there's public comment, robust board discussion, Becky Christopher, our policy director, is here to answer questions, and then we'll scoop up all the feedback, synthesize that, and we'll be back in front of the board in September to adopt the budget and certify the levy, which is a decent segue into just the process that we've run. So we just talked about this as well. A lot of hard work has been put into the budget this year already by the staff team, but also by the board, and I think importantly by the Citizens Advisory Committee. I continue to be amazed at them billing the budget as the most exciting thing that they do each year, which is great. We'll take all the help we can get. As I mentioned a moment ago, pending public comment, after all that hard work, and tonight the board's required by statute to adopt the budget, certify the levy by September 15th. So we'll be at the September 12th meeting with looking for action, and then there's an opportunity to refine the budget leading to the end of the year with a final comment period in November. I think everybody knows by this point, and if I am late for my flight, it's going to be because I like a good story and I want to tell a story about the budget. So before we step straight into the numbers, I wanted to take a minute to zoom out and remind ourselves and remind the public what our budget stands for and what it supports at a big picture level. Our vision, where we've been in recent years, and how all that work is going to carry forward into 2025 and beyond. So in terms of vision, the Watershed District's pursuing a balanced urban ecology because we really believe that natural systems underpin local identity, they create place. And so the watershed work, our work, we view as an essential component in building thriving communities. But because land use choices drive what happens with the water, how much and what's in it, but that we don't own or control how all the land is used. Whether we're working on our capital project portfolio or policies, we're always really thinking about how our investments, our time, our money, how those can be catalytic for our partners' goals in the built environment. And we do that by really starting from a position of science and then layering in our partners' interests and objectives, which might be things like transportation infrastructure, economic development, parks and open space, and the community and the people that live in the community, so that we can build amazing places in the watershed that are good for the environment, but they're good for the communities and good for the people that live there. And below that vision and our balanced urban ecology strategy, oriented around partnership, this slide, which we've looked at a few times as a team, illustrates how our programs align to implement that strategy on a two-pronged basis. So first, building high-impact projects that measurably improve the landscape, and then second, shaping policy at the interface of land use and water resources, with all of our programs aligning to support that. So as we think about implementing projects across 178 square miles, one of the things that we feel like we've gotten right is we've We believe that focus brings success, and so we've chosen focus as part of one of our principles. Focus really allows us to sustain attention in areas of highest need. It helps us understand local priorities, and it helps us build the situational awareness and the relationships we need to meaningfully integrate our work and serve our partners. And we currently have 4 major areas of capital project planning and implementation that we're focused on, and those are shown here on the map. We have our 44 square mile lower watershed, or the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed, and then upstream we have our Lake Minnetonka strategy, where we are focused on the 3 largest, most polluting tributaries to the lake, which represent double the direct drainage area to the lake, and all coincidentally drain to bays that are impaired for water quality. Outside of those focal areas, we also have the Land and Water Partnership Program. This was a program designed for our member communities, by our member communities, and this is a program of early coordination with our land use partners, where we provide technical and planning support and build on-ramps for their work into our capital improvement program. Taking a tour of some of that work and where it's headed next, in the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed over the last decade, we've invested considerably with our partners to treat over 2,000 acres of runoff across Hopkins, St. Louis Park, Edina, and Richfield. And in addition to reducing flooding and improving water quality, we've also created amazing, beautiful, and functional places that solve a myriad of other urban planning needs, like Orienting Methodist Hospital, this place of healing in the community around nature, which we know has improved patient outcomes and has also removed the hospital from the floodplain. Or the daylighting of the creek itself, which has connected 550 affordable housing units to a new 30-acre nature preserve. And upstream delivered a 5-acre expansion of active parkland by the city of Hopkins, resulting in a significant reduction in police calls and catalyzing the delivery of new housing that overlooks the park. And of course, our work at 325 Blake Road, which we hope will connect all of those projects, where we are partnering with the city of Hopkins and Alatus to transform a blighted 17-acre industrial site into an 800-unit mixed-use development that's anchored on the placemaking value of the creek. It's on the Southwest Light Rail Transit, as well as the Blake Station, and is ultimately going to provide 260 acres of regional stormwater management for 3 different cities. And that work, we're really proud to report, made the front page of the Strib last June for all the positive impact it's had locally, but also the positive impact downstream at Lake Hiawatha. And the article also signaled our efforts to forge a new water-focused partnership with Minneapolis and the Park Board. So as we finish critical projects like 325 Blake Road, connect the corridor with the Southwest Light Rail stream enhancements in the Greenway in Hopkins and St. Louis Park, we're also advancing 3 first phase projects in the Parkway that will treat over 500 acres of regional runoff. And that downstream focus has been complemented and balanced with efforts upstream in the 6 Mile Creek watershed, all 27 square miles of which drain to Halstead Bay. And in that area, we've been fortunate to have partners like the university or the legislature to understand the common carp population and restore over 3,000 acres of shallow lake habitat and water quality. We've used Clean Water Legacy dollars to address internal loading. We've delivered the City of Victoria's first ecological park on Wasserman Lake and completed a similar nature-based place in partnership with the City of Minnetrista, which restored over 230 acres of prairie on former farmland, eliminating hundreds of pounds of phosphorus from Halstead Bay. And in terms of where that work goes next, we're pursuing a series of wetland restorations tributary to Auburn Lake, as well as Turbid and Lunston Lakes, while also beginning technical and funding feasibility of the Halstead alum dosing facility, something that our Citizens Advisory Committee expressed a lot of interest in engaging in during this year's budget presentation. And those projects are included in our capital improvement program for design and construction next year, and the planning budget to advance feasibility in the coming year as well. Jumping to the north side of the lake, we've cultivated a partnership with the City of Medina, Long Lake, and Orono to deliver the Long Lake Creek Roadmap. We looked at some of these potential projects in committee just earlier tonight. We've got 3 active projects right now in this area, 2 of which are inside our 25 capital improvement plan. The Holbrook Ponds in Long Lake on the west side of the lake, which have $170,000 in state grant dollars, and the retrofit of County Road 6 Pond, both of which are tributary and serve to improve quality in Long Lake. And then our next major geography on deck for diagnostic and community-based planning is Painter Creek. That's slated to begin diagnostic monitoring and then ultimately community planning with $65,000 in the research and monitoring budget for 2025. And then over the next 24 to 36 months, that will lead into a roadmap that we integrate into our 2027 plan, leaving us with functional capital plans and roadmaps for each of our major focal geographies. So that's projects. I'm going to shift now to take a quick look at our policy work, where our primary emphasis has been on climate action and taking a data-driven approach to address the disruptions we're experiencing in our rainfall patterns. We all know this, but for those at home, I suppose, as a region, we've experienced the 7 wettest years on record. Leading up to 2019, we accumulated a 3-foot surplus of rainfall, a 36-inch departure from normal, and then the subsequent years have been spent in drought. And then 2024, as a snapshot, really offered us a taste of both. We had one of the driest starts to the year ever, followed by enough rain to put us 7 inches above normal, and then just over 3 inches behind the wettest year on record. So our watershed and the communities that we serve have experienced the boom and bust cycles of flooding and drought. We've seen that impact institutions. This was Methodist Hospital before our flood mitigation project. It's impacted public lands and brought into focus key decisions that our public partners have to make about the sustainable use of those properties, like the Hiawatha Golf Course. It's taxed aging infrastructure. It's damaged our natural systems like Minnehaha Creek, contributing to sediment load downstream. And I think importantly, it's highlighted old land use decisions that are still impacting us today, like the filling of over 80% of our area's wetlands, which we know are nature's filters and sponges. And at the center of all those impacts are people. People who like to network on social media looking for answers and formulating community narratives, and people who turn to elected leaders and local government looking for answers and help. And it's for those reasons, and with that situational awareness, the board developed our climate action framework, and the core of which rests on 3 pillars. First, understanding the water patterns in the district in a really granular way, and then understanding how those are going to change in the future. And then using that understanding of where the flooding will occur, who's going to be impacted, to bring our communities together to develop a shared, cohesive strategy, a policy and project approach. And our climate action so far has largely orbited around deploying real-time water level monitoring with our ResNet sites, shown here in the map, supporting emergency managers with short-term water level warnings, and developing a 2D future flooding model. And those initiatives obviously continue to have a place within our 2025 budget as we are completing the 2D model build in 2025 with legislative funding, and in policy planning and outreach, preparing for multi-year engagement with our communities to develop a cohesive approach to climate resilience that will be the cornerstone of our 2027 watershed plan. So we've talked about our vision, we've talked about our strategy, we've profiled some of that work, the projects and policy. I want to move now from our work plan to take a look at the bottom line that supports that work. As I mentioned earlier, the proposed 2025 budget shows a 0.5% decrease over 2024 and comes in at $14.42 million. As I mentioned earlier as well, there's 0 proposed increase in the district's tax levy. Pending the public hearing, the levy will remain flat in 2025 at $9.869 million. And stepping coarsely here through a breakdown, start with the capital budget. 2025 capital budget shows a 3.8% decrease, around $240,000 reduction. And that's simply based on the timing and composition of our project portfolio, some of which was profiled in the storyboard we just stepped through and is captured in detail in the budget. That capital budget, as a snapshot, includes the land and water partnership projects, like the Holbrook Ponds in Long Lake, the Calvary Church project in Deep Haven, the County Road 6 pond retrofit, our greenway work, so 325 Blake Road, Cottageville Phase 2, the Southwest LRT stream enhancement. It also includes maintaining some of our past work, so pond dredging for Cedar Meadows and the Nokomis Ponds, both of which serve the Minneapolis chain of lakes. Our Minneapolis stormwater projects, those first three phase projects, and wetland restorations that we talked about in 6 Mile, Auburn and Turbid and Lunston. So a pretty ambitious slate. And that work in part is supported with almost $700,000 in outside grant funds. I think that's something that's worth highlighting, because since 2020, the Watershed District secured just over $5.6 million in outside funds. And I think that, doing the rough math, that represents around 10% of expenditures over that same time period. So a signal of our partners and their willingness to invest in this vision to make a meaningful difference within the watershed. Next, and also as part of capital project implementation, is capital finance or debt service. And after a 74% decrease last year following our final balloon payment for land that we acquired at 325 Blake Road, next year's debt service will remain essentially flat at just under $1.1 million. I'm moving on now to operations, which houses 3 subfunds: general operations, information technology, and facility improvements. General operations in aggregate is projected at a net 11.4% increase. And I want to linger here just for a moment to give some context to that number. If you look at the summary breakdown in attachment 2 in your packet, which details out everything that goes into operations, general operations is showing a 4.2% increase due to basic inflationary costs of our base contracts, as well as a one-time energy audit, I think around $15,000 energy audit of the campus as part of our climate action framework. IT, which is the second subfund in general operations, is actually showing a 16% reduction as we place initiatives on hold next year while we backfill for our GIS coordinator. So the biggest change in this area is the budgeted number for the campus improvements, which revolve around reconstructing our exterior and improving the parking lot. And that number is anticipated to be reduced after this evening and after September through a systematic approach in the coming months before we finalize the budget at the end of the year. The budget for that project has been updated for inflation from the 2019 number that we've carried in our budget for a number of years. It also has a series of, I think, conservative assumptions, including bid alternates, some of which we're likely to eliminate. It includes our engineers and designers' recommended contingency, which I plan on reducing. And it assumes no contribution from our neighbors, because we're only counting inside the budget outside funds that we've secured through contract, and we're only in the early stages of negotiation with them. So there's some context there. I've discussed this as well with Treasurer Loftus. As usual, she's provided extremely helpful perspective to make sure pencils are sharp, that we're critically thinking about cost control. And I just want to leave the board here and reinforce for the public tonight that the number is going to be reduced through negotiation and planning before the end of the year. And then the board's decision on how to proceed will also likely be best informed by putting the project out to bid and actually getting real construction numbers rather than planning numbers. So some additional work to be done there between now and December. If we move down the ledger now to look at programs and round things out, in aggregate, our programs are down approximately 1%, coming in around $5 million total. Within this grouping of programs, we have permitting, and our planning teams generally are increasing approximately 3%. For permitting, that's based on a 5-year average of permits received and engineering costs. For planning, we've reviewed this over the budget build. It's largely based on project planning increases for work in the Minnehaha Parkway and Long Lake feasibility. And then outreach and research and monitoring are on the other side. They're both decreasing in around the 7 to 8% range. Outreach mainly due to strategic pruning that Samantha's been doing as she's tightened up her portion of the budget and the learning that she's done over the last 1.5 years. And then research and monitoring is being reduced mainly due to the net effect of us being in the second year of the LCCMAR funding for the 2D model build. So, hopefully with that summary of the total budget and levy, a breakdown of the expenditures and a little bit of backstory on our vision, strategy, what we've accomplished, and where we're going with our priorities, hopefully we've painted a sufficiently clear picture for the public hearing.
Thank you, James. Those of us on the board here, we've seen all these numbers multiple times in multiple meetings, as you outlined in the first slide. So we're very used to it, but you're right. Some of the public hasn't seen it, so describing it tonight is appreciated. Are there any comments before I close the public hearing?
Oh, great job. Excellent.
Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll thank you for an excellent presentation.
And it's 7:30, you can leave now.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll see you next year.
Wait a minute. Okay, next up is our action items, which include, the first one is 11.1, Resolution 24.047, authorization of the 2D model data collection contract extension and surveying equipment rental. Mr. Beck.
Chair Olson, Board of Managers. What I have before you today is a request for authorization to extend the contract to Bolton Bank for data collection, in addition to authorization for renting survey equipment for culvert surveying. Just at a high level, what we'll be talking about today is a little bit about what we just talked about was some of the climate action framework plan that we're working on right now. The 2D model in context of that climate work and the status of the project. Some of the data collection needs we've learned about as we've gone through the project, and lastly, rounding that out with a recommendation to the board. As was mentioned earlier, the climate action framework has 3 pillars, which the 2D model, which I'll be talking about today, largely fits into that pillar 1, and will be going, is currently underway and will be closing out in 2025. And I think it's really important to note that this isn't a project that's happening in a vacuum. It's being done in parallel with the policy planning group and the work they're doing to develop policy to help identify how to adapt to climate, the changing climate around us. And so it's really important that we continue to beat our deadlines, since the work that we're doing will weave into the work that Becky Christopher is leading on the climate action framework. And so what does it mean? I keep saying 2D model. We've talked a little bit about this, but the way that we like to describe it is we're going to create a digital representation of our physical world. And the goal of that is to understand in a granular way how water is moving through our systems. And what does that mean is taking all the different pieces of our world, like soils and wetlands and topography, and converting that data into a format that you can put into a computer model and run scenarios to see how water is moving through our system. And so in my mind, I always break any model build into 2 steps. There's a phase 1, which is just getting data from either a data source or from collecting that data, and then also filling any gaps, and then taking that information and putting it into a format that is able to be put into a model. and then ensuring that that model can accurately predict based on past information through calibration. So you ensure that the stream flow that you predict is actually what has happened in that system. So you know that your model can accurately run scenarios. So we started phase 1 of this, which was that data collection or data congregation in 2023 with Bolton and Mank. And one of the aspects of that that we identified early on was that we would need to characterize and go out and collect stream channel data. And what does that mean? It means you go out and if you sliced kind of right through any part of the creek, you could go out and say, what does the shape of that creek look like? And the goal of that is to go all along each channel section and characterize and show what the creek looks like, so you know how water gets conveyed through your system, through streams. As we went through and were doing planning the surveying throughout the watershed, what we identified was the Minnehaha Creek system has a very well-defined channel. It's pretty straightforward to go through and identify where to do cross sections. So that was about 215 cross sections which we collected and logged. What you might notice in the upper watershed is that there's a lot of dotted lines, dashed lines, and lightly colored lines. And the reason for that is that our upper watershed is more of a series of connected wetlands than channelized creeks. And that causes some problems for defining what your channel looks like compared to saying, a really well-defined channel in Minnehaha Creek. And the board saw a presentation about, for example, the East Auburn wetland. And what you can see here is many wetlands are ditched, so there's somewhat of a channel, but they don't really act like streams because water can move through that channel pretty quickly, but also it can move outwards and inwards really easily. So it's not a confined channel like you'd think of in Minnehaha Creek. And so there's a lot of methods to incorporate these into models, and the way that you incorporate it into the model really will tell you how to collect the data in the field to get that into the model. And so what we did is, knowing that we hadn't made all decisions on how we were going to build the model yet in phase 2, we put a hold on surveying the upper watershed channels and moved on to the second part, which was developing a system to process 29 communities, storm sewer networks, 2 counties, and then also multiple state agencies, all the different stormwater systems that they own and operate into one single format. And that was one thing that we largely have completed. So developing computer code that takes each database from each city, county, and state agency and puts it into one single format. And so that's largely completed, and we have that data available to put into the model at this point, which is great news. So something accomplished, feels good. In addition, we went and identified how many culverts have missing data or aren't represented in any data set. And we identified approximately 2,500 culverts that are missing to collect. And so these can vary a lot from a 4-foot culvert in a pretty large, like a highway, all the way down to a 6-inch culvert that might go under a driveway. And so there's varying size and importance of these culverts, so that's important to note. And so...
Can I just interrupt? Can I ask the engineer, does any other watershed district have this kind of information available? Okay, that's what I figured.
Wow.
And ours is probably more complex because it's partly urban and rural. Okay. Wow. Great, thank you.
Incredible.
And I think sometimes we like to overlook culverts as kind of maybe not the most important stormwater feature on our landscape. But again, going back to that East Auburn example, if you look at the very outlet of that goes into East Auburn, what's at the outlet of that wetland is a culvert. And you can imagine that the elevation of the culvert dictates how much storage can be in that wetland. And so they're really important to understand what the elevation is. So it's not one where you just want to make assumptions about what each one is at. You want to actually know, especially downstream of wetlands or in really important flood areas, what the elevation of that culvert is.
Terrific.
But we at least know how many there are and where they are, which also is really useful so we can go and collect that information. And so what are the take-homes from phase one of our work was, number one, for stream surveying, we need to understand how we're going to represent the channels that are in between wetlands and also in wetlands in the model before we go out and survey them. Number two, the storm sewer data processing system that we've built is largely functional and reproducible. So that's something that we have to use in the future to process any changes that occur. And lastly, we know the number and location of missing data for culverts throughout the watershed. So that's phase one. That's where we're sitting today. And we have the original project budget was approximately $189,000, and we reserved $66,000 of that for the remainder of the stream channel surveying, and that will be informed, and I'll talk more about our approach to that in a moment. So there's a second phase, which is taking all of this information, or information that we'll have in the near future, and putting it in the model like I had mentioned. And we broke that out into 7 steps. And the first step was putting that up for RFP, which happened earlier this year. And we selected HDR to work on this project with us. The first phase of it was just a data discovery phase for HDR to understand the data sets that we have available to us, and many of the ones that I just mentioned, which moves us into the model build approach. This is something that we learned in past model builds, was that being on the same page about how the model is built is as important as building the model. So we know what's going into it. And this is really important because one of the things that we know is also really important is this is what it's called in the project, which is the non-pipe stormwater data set. That probably doesn't mean much to most people, but essentially what that is storage. So what are outlet structures, culverts, weirs, things like that, in addition, wetlands, lakes, ponds, any storage. So it's the next step is how we're going to characterize that in the model. So we're at a really critical junction of deciding how the model is going to be built and how we incorporate this information in the model. And that's all going into the next step, which is 4 and 5, which is actually building a preliminary model, seeing how it runs, and then collecting any data that we need to after we understand kind of where the remaining data gaps are. And this brings everything home to, which is the approach of how we're incorporating wetlands, the stream channels and ditches in wetlands, and the outlet structures, which could include weirs or culverts or any structure at the outlet of our storage is really important to define and inform how we collect that information. So the plan for collecting the remaining stream channels is after we develop our model build approach over the next 2 months or month, and that non-pipe stormwater data set, is have Bolton and Mank be able to go out and have an informed method for how we collect those stream channels in the upper watershed based on tasks 2 and 3. In addition, we'll keep going. In addition, we want to collect culvert data, and in the April meeting, we had suggested that maybe we would purchase survey equipment, but the board had suggested to us is what are the different options for collecting the data. So I can run through what those look like. The The first one, which was purchasing the equipment, purchasing equipment that is identical to the equipment that Bolton and Mank is using, and the value of that is knowing that we have consistent data collection approaches, is $35,000, which is a pretty high price tag. We identified a lower cost solution at $10,000, but it has lower accuracy, so you can imagine you're going from millimeter, centimeter scale to kind of greater than maybe a centimeter or so. So you're losing your accuracy for that cheaper equipment. And you're also not having a consistent equipment type compared to what we're doing for stream channels. We also looked into renting survey equipment, and what we tested that out, and it's $1,000 per week to rent survey equipment that is identical to the equipment Bolton and Mank is using, to go out and collect survey. District staff go out and collect the culvert elevation data. And lastly, we looked into what it would cost to have the consultants within their current scopes collect the data. And what that would do is shift the majority of the remaining data collection from, in HDR's budget, from wetland survey data collection to culvert survey data collection. And we really wanted to reserve, knowing how important wetlands are to the district and characterizing them, we wanted to reserve as much as we could going into that data collection period for HDR as possible. And so if we look at, again, how many culverts we're missing, it's 2,500, it's more than a few. We went out and rented the survey equipment for a week, or 2 weeks, and we identified that we could do about 50 to 75 culverts per day if we were being efficient. And you can imagine the easiest ones kind of you can get first, and then they get less efficient and less easy as they become kind of harder to get to. But that was approximately what we think that we could collect. So if we wanted to get to that 2,000 to 2,500, it would take about 8 weeks at a rental cost of $8,000. And so just kind of going back by the numbers, we have about 450 channels to collect, which does come very close to that 60, we have 66,000 approximately left in the Bolton and Mank contract, so we think we can characterize the upper stream channels. We have 2,500 culverts to survey, and we think that would take 6 to 7 weeks, but we thought adding the 8th week on there would really allow us to collect the culverts we need. And so we think we can do this largely within budget, but then also having MCWD staff augment the culvert survey data collection to ensure that we have the data to build this model as it should be. And so, just kind of going back, we wanted to ensure that the board knows that we aren't just putting the brakes on the whole project. It largely is happening in parallel, and that the surveying that will be done by Bolton and Mank and by staff will happen over the next few months. And the preliminary model build, task 5, starts in November. So it really happens after the majority of the data is going to be collected. And so things are still on track from a timeline standpoint, so we can continue to try and deliver on time and schedule and budget. Oh, I had a check mark there. But with that being said, the request today is asking the board for authorization to extend the Bolton and Mank contract, which expired in March of 2024 to March of 2025, to allow them to continue the surveying of stream channels within their contract period, and also authorizing staff to rent equipment for amount not to exceed $8,000. With that, I can see if the board has any questions.
Thank you. Well, first of all, do I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Manager Loftus and a second from Manager Maxwell. Discussion.
How do you go about finding 2,500 culverts?
Look down.
Chair Olson, Manager, There's a couple ways to do that. The first is that the counties have a pretty good culvert.
Manifest.
Yeah, and so the locations of many of them are actually located, but there's not elevation data for most of them. So that made it pretty easy. We also had Kimley Horn do an analysis, and you can imagine if no culverts existed and you poured water on the watershed, you can identify where it pools, and wherever it's pooling is a suggestion where a culvert might be if it's in there, almost always behind a road. So if you add a bunch of water onto a surface, in a model or something like that, which is what they did, you look where it's pooling essentially, and that you can locate where the culverts are probably, and so we can go out and verify those if they aren't already in the data set. So there's about 250 of those and about 2,200 known data gaps. And,
Would they show up on a Google map? Like you said, pooling of water, would they, if you're, it's all overhead, would they show up on a Google map?
Yeah, sometimes they do show up in a Google map in that you can see kind of where water would go in under a road,
Yeah.
but the way of just kind of using kind of some simple methods to look at where water would pool, and then seeing if there is a culvert is a good way to flag where they probably should be. And so we identified about 250 that way as well.
Thank you.
When all is said and done, how is this data used to help prevent flooding, or what's the ultimate goal?
Yeah, Manager Sando, that's a good question. I think that our goal is, number one, to put this into the 2D model so we can ensure that we understand how water moves through the system, but then also areas where there's going to be issues to identify how to work with our partners to either adjust whatever their storm sewer networks look like, add storage where more storage is needed, or identify other potential policy or project options. But I think kind of a secondary and what we think is really important is continuing to add this data to the databases and provide it back occasionally to the folks that maintain their databases, so that we don't have to continue to collect data over and over again, which is the other goal, is to work with our communities to help them do some data collections as well, to help how they manage their systems. So that's a secondary.
And better control the water flow through our area.
Exactly.
Thank you.
It sounds like quite the task to be undertaking for 8 weeks, but I appreciate looking at all the options and your willingness to undertake it. So, thank you. If you're short a person or whatever, call me, but also call James. He's not here, so we get to volunteer him for whatever we want when he's not at the meeting. So,
Yeah, Manager Loftus, I'll make sure I'll coordinate his schedule and see where he has some gaps.
yeah, I think that would work really well.
Yeah, especially the really hard to get culverts, I think
Yeah.
are the best ones.
Yep.
Yeah,
Where you have to like army crawl.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, thank
And
you.
at night with a big flashlight.
yeah.
Yeah.
At night. I do have a question regarding project management. You've got Bolton Mank with the data collection contract. You've got HDR with the discovery of data sets. You've got Stantec with the flood action plan. How do you ever get these groups in a room together? How do you get everything coordinated?
Chair Olson, I think it's, well, we work obviously very closely with the folks that are managing the flood action plan. But yeah, I think it is, the way that we've set it up is each consultant checking the other consultant's work. So that's how it's largely happened. So the work that Kimley Horn did on the pilot project was reviewed by a few different entities, and then they record that.
Okay.
And then the work Bolton and Mink is doing was reviewed by HDR, and we're recording that, which is part of the data discovery, which highlighted some of the kind of perceived data gaps that were in the storm sewer processing system. But really, actually, that data does exist. There's just a few little kind of errors in their code. And so I think right now it's us acting as kind of a central hub for the information and then coordinating with the different consultants to ensure that they're getting the information they need, but also delivering on the project scope.
Outstanding.
I feel like we've gotten so many wonderful outcomes of you coming internally to this organization, and I think one of them is you have a unique knowledge set where you can work with multiple consultants, and one of the advantages of bringing on multiple agencies is when you go out and ask for proposals, you actually get them, because sometimes if you keep picking the same firm, nobody responds after a while anymore. But it does take a special background to be able to manage different companies. So I appreciate that about your background, and it's one of the many things you've contributed to the organization. So I appreciate that again.
Yeah, well, I should mention that Kaylee Cermak was the one managing both the pilot model and Bolton and Bank, and really did
She's still there?
I don't think she is. I want to make sure that she did a wonderful job, better than I ever could, coordinating them as well. So I think it's worthwhile saying that.
My reaction to this presentation is, it makes it worthwhile staying around as long as I have. I mean, this is really exciting stuff, and I'm just wondering, new staff people are probably have concluded they're in the right place because this is really good basic stuff that nobody else is doing, and that it's going to be a really important tool for decision making in the future.
One other side note of having those consultants cross-checking each other is when we get to our community management plan, we will have other agencies questioning our methodology and results, and chances that they have a relationship with one of multiple agencies and have some trust built is better than just one consultant. So there's a little bit of hopefully trust capital you're building there, especially if we start our policy or even regulation based on this data and these models. I appreciate how methodical you've been about making sure it's accurate. So thanks.
Any other comments? Okay, with that, I'll ask for a vote on the resolution. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Do you need a roll call on that? Because it's a contract? Or is it a contract?
We do not, okay.
No, we're all okay?
You're good.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Outstanding presentation. Next up is item 11.2, Resolution 24-048, authorization to execute a contract with Stantec for flood action plan.
Right. Good evening, Board of Managers. So I'm excited to be before you this evening, as MCWD staff and the board have been talking about the need for a flood action plan for some time, as we all recognize the importance, the need for a plan to provide a clear structure of roles and responsibilities of staff during a flood event. And so the purpose of this plan is essentially to act like a push button that really allows staff to efficiently and effectively organize in order to take immediate action and provide service and value to our communities. And the benefit of a flood action plan, is that it's going to be clear, it'll have a command-like structure with predetermined action roles for staff and each program during a flood event. And really by setting these norms in the plan, this will provide staff the ability to respond and also move quickly in an orchestrated manner, to thereby reducing staff time and capacity by trying to internally self-organize for each flood event. Also, just as a quick kind of touch point of how this feeds in and touches or connects with our climate action framework. Back in July during committee, I walked through our climate action framework work plan and included highlighting that the flood action plan is a high priority for staff this year and making sure that we have that ready for next year. And so during that committee meeting, I had highlighted I would be bringing this contract before the board. And so here this evening I am with staff recommending the board of managers authorizing to execute a contract with Stantec in an amount not to exceed $41,591 to develop a flood action plan. And so in terms of lessons learned over the last decade, the district staff continue just to learn and expand on our existing data sets, as we just heard from Brian Beck, and really continue to get more refined in our system understanding. And so this understanding really allows us to inform and also help guide how we can make the most effective flood action plan for our watershed. And this includes, rolling in lessons learned from our 2014 flood of record, all the way to even this year with our wet season after 3 years of drought. So just kind of learnings we gained even from 2024. And so this year, key district staff came together based off of staffing changes within the district, and they formed what we call now, or currently calling the Flood Action Team. And so that includes James, Brian Beck, and Samantha, and then also Chris Meehan as from our district engineer with Stantec. And so together this team collaborated on dam operations and management planning, but they also really dug into the forecast and decision-making process, communication strategy and management planning, and also going out into the field to kind of verify what we're seeing in real time. And so back in June, the board received an update on some of these 2024 staff learnings from Maya and Brian, both on dam management and then also the respective outreach engagement work tied to water levels. And so all of this work and lessons learned really just brought a new level of clarity and focus around the need for a flood action plan. And so with that, we have 4 goals with our flood action plan. First, obviously, we need to delineate roles and expectations by providing these clear roles for each program based off of a flood phase. So thinking about who's doing what, right before a flood, during a flood, after a flood, and also taking into consideration actions based off the severity of the flood. And then that really feeds into our second goal for this flood action plan, which is to define flood event categories. So, right, each flood is different in its magnitude and its duration, and the flood action plan will need to define actions that are proportional to the level of severity of flooding that we're seeing. We also want to make sure we are documenting and creating standard procedures that are consistent for staff to use during a flood event, and then making sure we're incorporating that institutional knowledge that we're gaining and lessons learned over the years. And of course, we want to make sure that we are as well looking to the future and thinking about strategic improvements that we can make over time and build off of our flood action plan. And so with that, the district engineer has been an essential team member that's acted not only as a strategic advisor, but also really collaborated with program staff on how to refine the district's approach to its decision-making process for both dam and communication management. Thinking through the forecasts, the real-time data that we have, and field conditions, particularly during the 2024 season. And staff found the district engineer to just be uniquely qualified to develop this flood action plan based off of that recent learnings from 2024. And also their history with the district during the 2014 flood of record, their working knowledge of how we're operating and managing Grays Bay Dam, and then their strong understanding of just the staff group's collaboration process and decision making. And so with that, staff then decided to collaborate with the Stantec team to co-develop a proposal. And so working with the Stantec team to develop this proposal, to making sure that we are really staying focused to achieve those 4 goals of this plan. And so we focused on the approach to collect and synthesize data from previous flood seasons to really help us kind of key into what these potential flood categories could be. We also want to make sure that we're revisiting select dam operation scenarios to extract these lessons learned over time. And also making sure we are co-developing and then having a clear document of staff roles and responsibilities throughout the life cycle of a flood event. And then making sure that we can take all of that into a cohesive plan and essentially have a push button so everybody knows what they need to be doing. In addition, while we were developing this proposal, we worked closely with Stantec and we reviewed and really rolled up our sleeves to refine assumptions and kind of walk through task by task and just making sure the level of effort and correctly correlated to the budget. And so we really made sure that was dialed in. And so overall, the proposal has a really thoughtful approach and methods that really builds on these lessons learned that we've been learning over the last decade, and then make sure that this flood action plan will meet our goals and within the budget of not to exceed $41,591 within our timeline to be ready by the end of this year. Therefore, staff recommend the board authorize the district administrator on the advice of the council to enter a contract with Stantec to develop a flood action plan for this amount. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get into a discussion, do I have a motion to approve Resolution 24048?
Motion approved.
We have a motion from Manager Sando. Do I have a second?
Second.
Manager Miller, thank you. Discussion.
No, it sounds like a good project, good price. I think it's well worth it.
Manager Hopkins.
Some of the things I'm interested in is, taking what we learned a decade ago in 2014 and kind of applying it to how could we make a major flood event response better, right? How do we, when we look at climate action and flooding, how do we mitigate or build capacity for our district? This to me sounds a little more focused on like a internal institutional staff SOP, which maybe, isn't what I'm looking for as far as like broad picture. And maybe I'm missing something on that, but, institutional knowledge, or I know we have a dam operation plan, kind of those operational plans are, I guess, needed with like Tiffany moving on and whatnot, but when we talked about, lessons learned from 2014 and climate action, I was envisioning kind of those bigger issue, and I realized recently with like some staffing gaps that this summer we've learned some new things and realized some new gaps, but I don't know if that means that's what this plan should be about. Or it wasn't, I guess, what I ultimately want answered at some point. So maybe I'm missing the focus changing, or it feels like a slight change of focus. Can you tell me if I'm,
No, thank
can you
you,
correct
Manager
me on that?
Loftus. Yeah, so I think, there's kind of two pieces. And so with our climate action framework, this flood action plan was nested as one project. And it's really keyed into thinking about, right, how during a flood, how are the staff going to respond, right? Who's doing what? So kind of that SOP piece you're talking about, but also then making sure that we can respond to different levels of flood, and also thinking about the communication out to emergency managers, residents, and making sure we're really keyed in that piece. There's a bigger picture that's tied, I think, to the climate engagement that you're getting at as well, is really thinking about, how are we going to be addressing flood as a broader strategy. And so I think that's going to be going through the engagement process along with the model build over the next few years. And so I think the intent of this flood action plan is, as the team has been talking about it, is really looking at who's doing what, so there's no question.
Just from a staff perspective.
Just from a staff perspective.
Not a stakeholder perspective.
Correct. I think that will come later with the climate engagement piece. So this is really focused on
Climate
internal
engagement
operations.
piece. Okay, tell me more about the climate engagement piece then.
Yeah, so I think with the climate engagement piece, right, that's pulling in the model, right? That's part of this on-ramp of creating a discussion around what is our cohesive plan to address climate change within the whole watershed. And I think this is one piece of it, is how do we address storage? And so we'll be working with, technical advisory committees, all of that, that'll feed into this next plan. and I'm trying to probably do this at a high level, but I think big picture, we want to make sure that we're engaging our communities around the overall piece that's causing, these issues. But this is just an SOP for us to take action.
And that's necessary. You need an internal staff operational plan to
Yes.
respond, to operate the dam.
No, I
And to-
appreciate that, Manager Loftus. I think with this, what we're trying to do is we have a lot of different, existing operations around how to manage the dam. Thank you. And then, it's all different places, so we're trying to bring this together into a cohesive, concise plan. So when it does flood, everybody is clear what their expectations are across each program.
And everybody
Yeah.
being internal staff.
Internal staff.
Okay.
And that also includes them thinking about when and how are we doing external communications from like our outreach team.
Sure.
Right? Is it a minor
Yeah.
flood? Is it a large flood? Thinking through those pieces. And so I don't know if,
Yeah, and I guess I understand the need for that, but it seems like such a minor, that isn't the right word. The bigger issue that we hope to address and wrap our arms around is how we engage with other stakeholders and how our role is within that, as an organization, not as a internal staff, day-to-day operation. So I guess it's a very different scale, I guess, than I expected.
I kind of look at it as a first step for everybody knows their role in case something does happen. And then from there, then now we expand this to the other, but now everybody will know their role for what.
For $40,000, we're already doing it.
Well,
I guess I'm hoping for more out of, like, more ideas of like,
more for 40.
or, our other agencies looking at flood action plans. What are the standard steps? Who have you looked at recently who's done this? I guess I'm just, it seems like it's documenting institutional knowledge, which can be helpful, but I feel like it's maybe a little bit of a pendulum swing on a staffing gap that we've had, more than it is like a goal from a climate action plan we had a couple years ago and a flood we had a decade ago, and trying to solve for those bigger picture issues. But if it's something you need, then you should do it, I guess. It's just not, from a board perspective, what I thought we were focusing on at this point, but perhaps it's necessary.
Yeah, I can try to speak to that too. Yeah, certainly there's, as Kate said, it's part of a much bigger picture and much bigger effort we're undertaking, but I think it is, in terms of a shift, I think this is always sort of what was intended from staff's perspective when we talked about a flood action plan or a flood response plan, is just having sort of again, kind of that clear SOP for what we do when we're in a flood event and kind of what our role, defining what our role is versus, a city or other entities, and what we need to be prepared to provide to the public and to our partners.
So there will be some of that outward facing.
Yep. And part of what we're doing sort of in parallel is just continuing to kind of make those connections, make sure we have kind of the relationships we need there in terms of understanding the roles relative to these other agencies and and if we need to document that more clearly or strengthen any of those partnerships, that's part of what we're working on as well actively, and that's part of what will be kind of in the recommendation section, is if there is sort of an opportunity to improve a connection like that.
So that'll come at the end in the recommendation section. That's not going to be part of the beef of this.
Right. No, it's
report.
mostly just for, it is
Okay.
mostly an internal SOP. And so, I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think it's something that's reactive to, the staff changes either. I think this is sort of something that was identified back when we had the 2014 flood as something that we could really improve and kind of have a stronger documentation of. So I think it's something that's been in the works and envisioned for quite some time, and we've kind of, it's been less pressing with, the drought years we've been having, but I think this spring it was like, okay, we really need to get this dialed in, and there was, like I said, a lot of time spent across that team coordinating, every day, looking at the forecast, trying to figure out what do we do in terms of the dam management decision, when do we push communications. So just kind of getting that locked in, so it's less of a drain on staff to kind of have those coordination costs.
Both when and who and how. This reminds me of a water problem that the a branch of the U.S. military had where there was contamination of water and denials everywhere at the time that there was a problem until people were getting sick. And then 14 officers left the military, and the final analysis was nobody talking to anybody, didn't know who the responsibilities were, and it was just a mess. And today they've solved the problem, but at the time there was no structure. And so as you look internally to our organization, I would love to have a rehearsed, everybody knows their assignment if that alarm goes off. If that alarm goes off, they know what their job is. They know how to already communicate to the outside world, but it can't all go to her. It's got to go to everybody who's got a feeler for the folks that need to know. So it's a situation where, in my opinion, we're going to look smooth and professional when that terrible thing happens. And although we can hope it never happens, we're going to be ready for it. So I appreciate the fact that the staff probably already knows what to do outwardly, but how we organize inwardly is going to make it happen. So that's why I value this program.
And it's not just documenting what you're doing, it's organizing it in some different way.
Yep.
And I think some of the costs are associated too with actually kind of digging into the data and looking at kind of key areas where we know we have flooding and making sure we understand kind of how the watershed actually responds, what have we seen under different flood events in terms of, kind of what, again, establishing those different flood tiers and just kind of how the watershed responds differently to different events over, in different situations. And so it is sort of some data analysis and work as well, where it's where some of the cost comes in, and there's kind of a breakdown in there of, we're going to analyze these 5 locations or whatever the number is, I could be getting that wrong, and 5 different storm events to really kind of have a data-driven strategy and establish some of those guideposts for how we make informed decisions about how to adjust the dam, and again, kind of what's the level of risk and why do we want to push that publication or push notice out to the public and to the emergency managers.
But you're not changing your dam operation plan.
No, not the core plan
You don't
itself.
want to touch that.
No.
So you're just documenting other areas of operation? Okay. Go ahead.
Girls Management Loftus is part of this because Becky worked so hard on the scope with me. Part of it is taking the lessons learned, just the data we have established over this past year with President. Understanding the dam, we have a little bit of flexibility in dam. We can't change the dam operations. That's like set in stone. We have some flexibility in there. But what we learned through this process is our partners relied on understanding how do the events, how are they going to impact us in our situation? And I'll use a prime example is Edina. When we were experiencing those potentials for big storm events in end of June, I remember it was June 22nd, we were on the call with their emergency management. They needed to understand, do we need to go hand out sandbags right now? Or are we going to just see backyard flooding and we're going to be okay? We have other areas in other watershed districts we need to go focus on that were like landlocked basins. And based on that information and what the data we tried to compile together, we're able to provide them information. Yes, you do not need to focus on Minnehaha Creek. We're able to move that forward. That is a far cry from what I experienced in 2014 when this place was inundated with phone calls because we didn't know. It's this continued evolution of how we can get better with how precipitation events happen and how we can manage that. Another example is we have a better understanding of how we can help the Park and Rec Board open the Nokomis Weir with storm events, and you saw it with what Maya and Brian presented as far as the peak flow goes. We have a good understanding of when they can start to open up the weir, how much time they need to have to open and close the weir. Does that 1-inch event, does that matter to you at all? Or does it just gonna kind of come and go and it's not really gonna influence it? So part of it is documenting that, understanding. Some of the communication though is gonna be, how do we help our partners communicate to those stakeholders? And what we've been asked to do is bring Stantec's national expertise on like disaster recovery, flood recovery assistance, those plans. What are best practices that can help the district? Again, the whole, my mind is, and what I would like to continue to experience, how do we leverage the strengths of the district to help our partners manage these responses? Because what we're seeing is not only are the volumes changing of how much rain we get in a year, the thing that's really, really strikingly apparent is the intensity of the storms that we get, how fast they come and how they strain our system. and how we're not really able to catch up to that. So part of that is gonna be to help them understand as the intensities go, where are your pain points gonna be? And we're really gonna be able to push this forward when the 2D model comes forward, but have that understanding as part of that. So there are gonna be recommendations on how, again, to continue to improve. The dam operations are what the dam operations are, and we can do with that. We have flexibility in there, but it is allowing us to have a better understanding of, the prime example is, just the past 3 weeks, the park board emailed, I think the district, Ryan, 3 or 4 times, can we open the weir again? Can we open the weir again? When are you gonna shut the dam down? It's having it, just being able to have that communication out to them, like, here's how it's gonna go. Because a fun fact, it takes 3 days from when we open the dam to get to the high water rate. Just having that understanding, being able to communicate that to our partners, and also making sure, James had a good comment about this, is when we do communicate, it's impactful. So when we do our water level updates, it's great, we do it on a monthly basis, gives them an update. But when we get rains, do we get too chicken little about it? As far as like, oh, it's gonna rain, we should all worry about it. Having a good understanding, like when we put a notice out, it's meant to be meaningful. And it's meant to be like, okay, this is something I need to pay attention to, so that we just don't kind of get lost in the noise. So, because Kate and Becky are good at telling me, here's my scope, that's where we are gonna put that forward. I do think there's probably more of an external component of it, but as part of this plan, we intend to push forward because I know that's where the board wants to go. It's like, how do we use this to build capacity, to create strategies, to really allow us to focus on our strengths, and allow our partners to help support the overall program as far as dealing with climate change and flood forecasting.
Yeah, and I hear you on the, like, day-to-day issues and communication on some of the smaller ones, and obviously, you know, the 100-year and the 500-year floods that are now not every 100 years or every 10 years are what concern me. And so do you have a deep bench in, you know, nationally of other districts? And I mean, there's the FEMA template anyone can use. We can all do tabletop scenarios on emergency management, but you know, who are we looking to find the latest, you know, disaster planning? And you know, those are the things that we need to plan for too, because those are the big events.
Yeah, our lead person, his name is Matthew Llewellyn. He's out of Sacramento.
Okay.
And he deals with the California Department of Water Resources, which is the largest water agency in California. They, you know, not only do they deal with floods, they deal with droughts, and then when they deal with
Fires, yeah.
then they deal with floods.
Right.
Because then they deal with debris. And so it's really leveraging his expertise, because not only, you know, he has to again, deal with, the FEMA standards are a checkbox, but how do
Right.
you get innovative and creative? Managing, there's limited resources, there's limited staff capacities, and how do you allow agencies to play to their strengths so that the overall partnership that you pull together, the collaborative, works seamlessly together.
Okay, thank you for the information. I just, listening to the presentation, when you kept saying everybody knows, I was like, everybody is just staff. Not just staff, but it's not stakeholders. When we say everybody knows in these scenarios, it's internal, it's institutional, it's not stakeholders, external. Right?
Well, I kind of keep track of the folks west of 100 before the mill pond, because they get flooding there. The city sends out pallets of sandbags
Yeah.
every time. There's a chance of it, just to make sure that people aren't all worried about it. And they don't put them out very often. I mean, they don't use them very often, but they're there.
Collect them back.
Yeah,
up,
and it's a precaution.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully, you know, we don't use Houston as a model. There's, you know, they flood out and then let them rebuild on the floodplain again.
Right.
And between FEMA, you know, payments and our insurance coverage that everybody is, you know, paying for higher insurance, we're paying for this ridiculous, you know,
Rinse and repeat.
yeah, they got the information and they don't use it. I think the people along the creek too, it seems to me they're using our website a lot more for information, and just, if nothing more than just be assured that they're not going to be flooded out.
Yeah.
I think this is really, really well done.
Any further comments?
I hope at some point we get to you know, like, how are we gonna, as a district, add capacity for people? Like, we need to find a way to hold this water that's coming down faster, more frequent, harder. Like, we gotta get creative about that at some point.
Yeah, and yeah, Manager Loftus, I mean, that is really what the bigger convening press is about, as Kate mentioned, and really kind of running the different scenarios, testing different strategies with our partners and
So we're gonna
pushing for, you know,
wait for a few, well, it's just hard to wait, sorry.
yeah, sure. I mean,
It's
but
like,
it also
when
needs
are
to
we
be,
doing this?
it also needs to be collaborative. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I
it's
know.
something we can
Okay,
push
so
forward
this
along.
is the first step, and we'll get there. All right, okay.
When you come right down to it, how many houses are threatened? I mean, really, by the creek? Couple dozen?
Maybe 30.
Yeah. So it.
But it's not just the creek, I mean, there's
Yeah,
water
I-
bodies that flood
Yeah,
and.
but this is principally the creek, isn't it, that you're working on?
No, we're, like, we've essentially looked at, like, where are the key
Oh, okay.
key areas. I mean, that's
All
why,
right.
like, Zumbra's on there.
Okay, I didn't understand that.
Bill, I don't know, Zumber has been pretty quiet this year, but 2014, how many days were you out there, almost there?
Lake Minnetonka had an entire peninsula underwater.
Point taken.
I mean,
Okay.
you know, there's,
Yeah.
there's flooding.
Yeah, I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
It was beyond the creek. Okay.
Yeah, all the headwaters where we can't send water down because it's already full. Yeah. Okay. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you for entertaining my questions.
We have no discussion items for the board. Board inquiries, issues, and ideas. Are there any comments? And this is where what you've just been talking about might come in, where we say, once we
James
do
has to
that.
do what? Oh,
Oh, yeah.
no, what? What was the?
Staff updates, administrators report. Becky Christopher.
Not by the mic here. I think I have just a few items, if I can find the right notes here. One moment.
Will you forward the criticisms that we present?
Let's see. So I do have just a water level update. Luckily, things have been a little more quiet on that front, but we're generally sitting quite well right now. Lake Minnetonka is at 929.35, which is 0.05 feet below OHW. The Hiawatha gauge dropped to 156 CFS, which we haven't seen the creek drop below kind of 180 to 200 since mid-June. And so having a little bit of a break here from the rain has allowed us to coordinate with the park board on Nokomis Weir operations, as Chris was mentioning. And between August 7th to the 14th, Lake Nokomis dropped an entire foot in 7 days. And they're now sitting 0.4 feet above OHW. And the extended forecast is also relatively dry, so we're anticipating kind of a normal drawdown into winter. So that is a relief. I do have a few staffing updates as well. I think James mentioned in committee, but Trey Jonas, our permitting technician, has decided it's time to move on to the next chapter of his career. So his last day is going to be next Wednesday, the 28th. So we certainly appreciate all his contributions, and he'll be missed. And Maggie and Veronica are doing a good job stepping up and transitioning some of the projects he's been working on. And so we'll be looking to backfill that position soon. We have 3 new staff starting in early September. So we've got a water resource scientist, Eva, starting September 3rd, permitting program manager, Andrew, starting September 9th, and then our engagement coordinator, James, is going to be starting September 10th. So we're going to have a lot of new faces. And we also just posted our GIS coordinator position on Monday, so hoping to get a good pool there. So getting excited to welcome a lot of new staff and keep growing the team. And then the last note I have is that James and myself and the other program managers had a meeting earlier this week with Jan Voigt, the executive director for Minnesota Watersheds, as well as Justin Hansen, Bowser assistant director. And Jan's been kind of working to make the rounds and get to know all the different watersheds and the work that they're doing. So that was a nice chance to share our work and also get to know her and some of the things that she's pushing for at Minnesota Watersheds. So that was just a good connection to build there. And that was really all I had for you.
Who called that meeting?
Jan reached out and requested it. She's been, kind of making the rounds with all the Metro Watersheds. I think we were one of 4 that day that she was meeting with, so, yeah, appreciate her
Thank you for doing
making the
that.
effort to do that, yep. Thanks.
Okay. With that, the meeting is adjourned.